Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay Nielsen. I'm the marketing manager with EcoEngineers. I want to welcome you to our webinar, RNG, What's the Next Frontier? We have some experts on board with us to give you all of the information on where RNG can move into and what's their next most profitable market. So without further ado, we're going to have, these are our three experts here today. Paul Misnick is a senior carbon consultant. He'll be acting as our moderator today with Ruxby Hartley, who's our climate risk director, and David Lindenmuth, who's our RNG services director. So I'm going to play the short video and then you'll hear from our experts.
Carbon is the biggest disruptor of the 21st century, and the world as we know it is changing. EcoEngineers can guide you to make the best decisions as you navigate toward your clean energy goals. Our diverse team of carbon analysts, engineers, scientists, auditors, and regulatory specialists are trusted advisors of the clean energy fuel sectors worldwide. Clean energy regulations are a maze. We simplify them with an unbiased approach and fully manage your compliance. Modeling your carbon reduction is complicated. We quantify your emissions with a rigor based in science. Together, we can create markets that will protect and grow your investment. We create sustainable solutions for a better tomorrow. We are EcoEngineers.
Hi, I'm Shashi Menon, the CEO of EcoEngineers. That video you just saw is EcoEngineers in a nutshell. We're a team of consultants, auditors, engineers, and scientists with deep expertise in low-carbon fuels, emerging technologies, and policies that are helping decarbonize the world. We are at the heart of the energy transition. At EcoEngineers, we are laser-focused on aiding, assisting, and supporting this transition to a clean energy economy. Through our education programs, our science-based approach to life cycle carbon analysis, through our asset development support, our engagement with policymakers, and through our compliance management and auditing teams, we provide a 360 approach to usher in the clean energy transition. The ultimate success of low carbon fuel projects and ultimately the future of our planet depends on the successful execution of net zero goals. And that's exactly what our team is here to help you do. Thank you.
To tee up the conversation today, we're really going to talk about the contrast in markets. So the traditional transportation market, heavily focused right now on California, where they can acquire both RINs and LCFS credits. That's the traditionally highest price market for RNG. And then also the non-traditional markets outside of there for transportation under regulated programs, but then the wider open-ended voluntary markets. To lead us off in the discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Thanks a lot, Paul, and glad to have Ruxby joining us today as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about RNG in California to start off. So what we've seen, as Paul said, that the RNG growth across the country has really been focused recently on accessing the high value and stackable market of the California LCFS and the US EPA RFS program. And we've been tracking the quarterly data from CARB as it's released each quarter, and the slide that we have presented here shows that over time, that carbon intensity of the gas being delivered and dispensed into California continues to decrease, really from the growth of dairy manure projects with really low CI scores and even some swine projects with even lower carbon intensity scores. And over time, they've displaced the traditional landfill gas that was originally being dispensed in California. And you can see as we got the completed data in 2021, the overall average score of RNG dispensed as CNG in California was at a score of -63. So you can see if you're a project trying to compete for placement in California, you better have a score that's lower than that or much lower than that to get a longer term contract. We don't see the pace of this really slowing down in the near term. EcoEngineers predicts that we'll have even just a conservative estimate of another 150 new animal manure pathways advancing through CARB and being registered and dispensing gas in California. And coming mostly from the RNG perspective, you might think that this is the reason why, California LCFS prices have decreased recently, but there's a much bigger story to that, and I'm going to turn it over to Roxby to talk more about that.
Thanks, Dave. The credit price in California, the LCFS credit price, has been the top point of conversation. It's not only the RNG that's contributing to the surplus credits that are driving the price down. You can see that RNG is dropping in CI score, even if the volumes aren't increasing dramatically. It's cannibalizing the CNG market almost completely. But then the dairy and swine manure projects coming online and dropping the CI score and adding extra credits. The other two areas where we're seeing a lot of extra credits coming to the marketplace are the EV market, as we're seeing EV growth, but also from renewable diesel. A lot of capacity has come online over the last year, and we expect that to continue. And renewable diesel not only generates a lot of credits, it also reduces the deficits in a way that RNG really doesn't. RNG is just increasing in its CI. Renewable diesel is going to start displacing, or is displacing, an awful lot of petroleum diesel, and that means that the renewable diesel is going to keep the credit price probably in this range until CARB changes the compliance curve over the next couple of years.
Thanks, Roxby. And if you're an RNG developer, producer, or feedstock owner looking to enter the RNG market, you might think, well, if California is not going to be for me in the future because I don't have an ultra low CI project, where do I fit? And I think there are lots of places where RNG fits, and the development cycle doesn't seem to be slowing down at all. There may be some projects that just don't work, that were dairies far away from pipelines and that were really small, that might need a higher LCFS credit price to work. But I think there are lots of other types of projects that are being developed with other markets in mind. And the continued growth of non-transportation thermal use markets, you see announcements almost on a weekly basis of programs either advancing from a pilot program to a more substantial program, or people increasing or setting longer term targets at higher percentages. There was an announcement just the other day about the continued approval for Canadian utilities to purchase RNG as a percentage of their fuel, and setting not just higher targets, but extending those targets in time. So giving more certainty to the market that there's going to be buyers out there looking for renewable natural gas. And, there are developing programs like the California program, SB 1440, where gas utilities will likely be looking to procure renewable natural gas for longer terms as they build percentages into their purchase targets. Paul and I were just talking about this the other day, that the Idaho PUC approved a voluntary program, and doing some quick math on the announcement, looks like the purchase price was for, to buy in $5 chunks as a resident in Idaho, but that $5 chunk, essentially is at a $33 per decatherm equivalent price that they're buying that RNG for. And so it'll be interesting to see how customers react and if they begin to purchase more of that. But there's more and more of these programs developing, and gas will need to come into the market to match this demand. We see projects from food waste to other types of organic diverted waste, just any type of feedstock that doesn't necessarily get the methane avoidance treatment that you do in California, really looking to be developed and place their gas into these markets. And then there's the whole second piece of this, which is really the ESG market, where customers are voluntarily taking on longer term contracts and buying RNG as a supply source. Seen announcements from Duke University, Mercedes, and others are really looking at making renewable natural gas part of their ESG goals and achievement targets. I think as we start to get more and more questions from not just buyers and producers in RNG, but those who are trying to manage the carbon accounting for these projects and for the ESG goals that are being set, there's a lot of confusion out there. And I think I'm going to ask Roxby to take over again and talk a little bit about scope emissions reportings and how RNG and carbon intensity interact with those goals and how you report those goals.
Thanks, Dave. we know that we have three types of emissions. Scope 1 emissions are essentially the emissions that from the fuel that you burn, whether it be in vehicles that you own or on-site facilities, or fugitive emissions. Scope 2 emissions are indirect. They're the emissions from generating the electricity or any emissions from purchased steam or cooling. Scope 3 emissions are also indirect, and this is where we measure the carbon intensity. This is where you do a life cycle analysis and understand all the carbon that's gone into producing a product. For instance, for crude oil, about a third of its carbon intensity actually comes from its processing, and 2/3 come from its combustion. There's some confusion in this because a Scope 1 emissions reduction, they're measured by, is it a biofuel or not? So if you're burning a biofuel, then you have to report the combustion of that biofuel, but it doesn't count to your Scope 1 emissions in the same way by its fact that it's a biofuel and not because of its carbon intensity. You can in fact burn some fuels with very high carbon intensity that would increase your emissions, but still offset your Scope 1 emissions. And that can lead to quite a lot of confusion, I think, between the scopes. So if you're looking for an understanding of your carbon intensity and what greenhouse gases you're offsetting, you have to not only understand the life cycle analysis, but you've also got to understand the jurisdiction into which you're reporting.
Thanks, Roxby. We're going to ask Paul to jump in here and start to really talk about the interaction of all of these markets.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I think for those of us who've been in the business for a while, what we're really just seeing is maturity in the market. There was a time when biofuels sort of operated on its own and then moved slowly. A lot of point of sale kind of deals were done. Now we have a sophisticated, mature market. RNG goes into multiple markets, and there's more ability for that fuel to find the proper value. Dave and I were just talking the other day that trading desks now take long-term offtake contracts from producers, sometimes even in stable, flat contracted arrangements, and then proceed to find that home, maybe not in a spot market kind of way, but find a home for that RNG, at least on an annual basis, choosing the best market. That kind of optionality, that kind of raw capitalism will always help the gas find its true value. So the environmental credits and their values are going to signal across a mature and sophisticated market. And we're going to see the influence of all the multiple markets on prices for the total gas. Still, of course, at the top of the heap will always be the transportation market. That is the most difficult market to decarbonize. Whether that holds forever is an interesting question, because the ESG market now is in its infancy. And some of these voluntary offtakes, for instance, for utility consumption that we saw, like SB 1440 and some of the other utility requirements for renewable replacement of gas, are in their infancy. We haven't seen this huge demand step into the marketplace. But for the meanwhile, all of those markets will need to get a signal from the highest price market and be able to respond in some way to be able to lure that gas away. And for the renewable natural gas producer, the question is, is my gas going to end up in a variably priced market like a transportation market, where credits, as Roxby talked about, have come down quite a bit, and where credits maybe don't necessarily reflect the cost to bring your gas to market? They don't represent the economics of renewable natural gas, CapEx or OpEx. Instead, they, as Roxy pointed out, it's about renewable diesel's cost to come to market in California. And same with the RINs section. There's a lot of disconnect between the cost of this gas to come to market and those credit prices. So the question going forward is, will renewable natural gas actually outpace transportation markets? Which will grow faster, especially in terms of price? Will these burgeoning new LCFS type programs that we're seeing, for instance, established in Oregon, in their nascent phase in Washington State? We just heard that British Columbia is increasing their carbon schedule to a 30% reduction instead of 20% reduction in 2030. So will the demand from those markets and then the new Canadian program, will they be the drivers for price, or will the much larger potential markets in heat, power, and for voluntary usage, will that outpace that demand, and will they be the price setters? It's kind of a good place for producers to begin, right? I mean, it's definitely you're going to end up with more demand for this low carbon intensity product, right, guys? Then you're going to end up having product. I think that's a big takeaway.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think what I wanted to tee up for Roxby is really that question about jurisdiction, though, as well, because not all programs and not all markets are starting from the same point. And so if you look at, a program with a certain baseline and you are being measured on the number of credits that you can generate versus that baseline, and a different market has a different baseline, it's not as simple as just comparing the carbon markets or the price of the carbon credits across those two markets. It's also about how many credits you're going to generate and understanding the parity of those markets. So if Roxby, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it is really complicated because each jurisdiction sets the boundaries of their life cycle analysis to suit their state, like California, Oregon, or Washington. They've all got very slightly different rules. So your carbon intensity of your fuel may be different going to those markets, but also the baseline might be different. So if you've got a 60 CI gas, but you're going to California in 2030 and the baseline is 80, you're really only seeing a differential of 20 grams per megajoule for your crediting. And so if you go to a different market that, say, Washington, say New York starts up, and they start at 100, then you can see that you're going to have a 40-point drop in your CI score for exactly the same gas. So the credits would have to be twice as valuable in California as they are in Washington or New York to make the same money. I think that California is going to drive this marketplace. California has its own goals, and for those goals to succeed, I think it needs a higher credit price. I think we're going to start seeing some action from California over the next couple of years, or the next couple of quarters, not a couple of years, to actually support the credit price to drive the programs that they want to succeed.
Yeah, one last thing I'd like to comment on, Paul, is just one of the last questions we had here was about carbon intensity and how does it fit. And I think Roxby's point about you may be able to eliminate scope 1 emissions, but that doesn't really connect 100% with the carbon intensity of the fuel. And more voluntary buyers are asking about that carbon intensity. With the proposed SEC rules, people want to understand that emissions aren't just getting shifted from one piece of a reporting entity to another. They really want to understand the full impact of a fuel or a product or a process. And that's really, where life cycle analysis fits in. And I see more and more with voluntary purchases, that those buyers want to know what the life cycle analysis is of that fuel, even if it's not a direct correlation to a credit that they're generating.
I think that's an interesting point, because we're seeing, those of us who've been working in the carbon intensity world for a long time, that all makes sense. I think to the people who are coming to this from the outside, they're only just hearing about life cycle analysis and carbon intensity, but they're hearing it from a lot of different angles, which sort of signals that understanding the carbon intensity of fuels is important to the future of the economy around fuels right now. So for instance, the IRA was just passed. There's a lot of the old biodiesel blenders tax credit and a lot of the production tax credits that are coming out all have language about the carbon intensity of the fuel. That didn't come out of nowhere. That came out of a sort of universal understanding that this is the future. Carbon intensity is important. Similarly, we see, like you said, from customers all the time want to know that. They're very focused more on scope 3 emissions because the SEC rules and the way the world's running in other markets like Europe, they're very carbon sensitive with a more sophisticated accounting. I'm going to stop right here. We've opened up a lot of broad ideas about the valuation of RNG and where it's going in the future. But I want to let some of our clients come to us with some questions so we can get them some of the information they need to understand this market. All right, we're back, with some questions from folks. We've got a good starter question, a very specific one, a perennial question. Can you explain what eRINs are? And I heard that EPA will issue those regs soon. Dave, you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. So the idea is that the eRIN pathway has existed forever, but there actually have been no approved projects within the pathway. So the eRIN pathway would be the generation of RINs that are generated from the renewable fuel source, just like they would for RNG, so landfill gas or other renewable fuels converted into electricity instead of pipeline quality RNG. And then that electricity would be used to charge electric vehicles. Essentially, that's your dispensing and replacement of fuel in a fuel tank, and so you would generate an eRIN. So there are still some questions out there about what's the conversion rate and how do I think EPA for years has had concerns around double counting. So how do you make sure that the electricity dispensed into the vehicle is only counted once? But it sounds like there's more and more grumblings from EPA that it seems like November may be the time when they issue some guidance on how they foresee that pathway working and who could potentially be the RIN generator in that pathway. But clearly, the people along that RIN pathway will be the producers of the renewable electricity. Potentially, the transmission or utilities may share in that. As they transmit the energy, and then obviously at the end of that, figuring out who owns either the charging equipment or the vehicle itself that's being charged may also share in the value of that pathway.
I received a question, and actually this is to you because it was about for projects who want to participate in electricity generation, potentially with the eRINs. What's your guess on the connectivity or what we used to call direct connection to the gas source? Like in LCFS, there's one set of rules, but what do you think EPA is going to do? Does it have to be on-site generation, some sort of direct connection to the generation of power from the biogas source, or can you go make RNG, put it in the pipeline, send it over to your neighborhood gas power utility and make eRINs there? What do you think the EPA is going to do?
I think that's a very interesting question because typically under the LCFS, if you're using RNG for process heat, then you can't claim booking claim it. But if it's being used as a feedstock, such as for hydrogen generation, then you can. So it's a question of whether the RNG is regarded as, I think, as a feedstock for the energy, for the electricity. So that's a really interesting question. I think we're going to have to wait until the EPA comes back with an answer to really to know which way they're going to go. Dave, do you have any insights?
Maybe, yeah. I was going to say. I mean, that may be. I think one of the questions will be: is that defined in the eRIN guidance, or is it going to be defined in the biointermediates guidance? And I think it'll be an interesting. It may, if it's within the biointermediates guidance, then you might get even sort of a glimpse into the thinking around the eRIN pathway, whether it's direct connect or not. But yeah, it's an interesting question whether you'd be able to book and claim and go to the most efficient, power generation that you can with gas, or if you've got a, if you're using the essentially mostly the installed technology that's there today, which is usually a direct combustion, engine on site at the landfill. So I think it'll be, or is it, at the end of the day, if EPA sets a certain conversion rate, then it really won't matter. So it will be interesting.
Great, guys. We're starting to run out of time. I want to knock off a couple quick questions. Someone asked if Mexican biogas inserted into existing U.S. Mexican pipelines, can they participate in U.S. transportation markets and LCFS? Short answer,
yes.
Yes. Long answer, call EcoEngineers from Assistance for Registering a Foreign Producer. It's not as easy as you think. Yeah, there's some special things for foreign producers of biofuels for participation in the United States. I know that for sure. Clean fleets. This has come up. There's a couple different questions about clean fleets or policy that might impact consumption. We heard a couple different things. So we've heard executive order, all cars have to be EVs by 2035. We've heard also there's I forget which one that one is, SB 1338. Is that right, Roxy? Where all municipal purchases must be ZEVs for buses, the Innovative Clean Transportation Act. That's the ITCA. Yeah, I don't know what the bill is, but it's the Innovative Clean Transportation Act. So gas vehicles don't count. It's only hydrogen and electric vehicles count for purchase. So your municipalities are obliged to purchase those type of vehicles instead of wildly popular natural gas vehicles right now. Can that be impactful? The answer is yes. It can be impactful to demand. Demand growth in California has been roughly 5 to 10% per year in terms of natural gas transportation. A lot of that is heavy duty fleets and buses as they convert over to CNG.
Yeah, I think one note on that, Paulo. I think in the EV market, right, it's probably going to be a more of a residential individual EV impact, and so I think you probably see that more on deficit generation, where you don't have a gasoline vehicle generating a deficit. The internal combustion engine ban really is a diesel and gasoline ban, so natural gas vehicles were not included in that ban if you look at the language. So there's definitely a carve out there where people see the value of the natural gas vehicle, especially in the heavy duty sector where there just currently isn't a competitor in the EV space.
Great. We have so many more questions than we have time for, so I'm going to try and knock out a couple. What will be the price impact to consumers from SB 1140, which is the requirement for 20% of renewable content by 2030? Don't know. We can do research on that, but it won't be cheap. Replacing 20% of the natural gas in California is not a small feat. It's probably not practical, but and that dovetails to another question. Someone said, hey, what percentage of natural gas in the US being currently used is RNG? And
yeah, and
I would say
it's less. So I've got some of those stats. Yeah, I mean, I think we doing some back calculation on how many RINs and what we assume goes in the transportation market. Really look at probably about less than 0.2 BCF per day is really RNG. So you're looking at less than 1% of the US it is RNG in the natural gas world right now.
So the short answer is, if you want to get to 20% or 15%, as some districts are talking about, some states, there's a heavy lift to get from here to there, which sort of assures a lot of demand. And you talked to that earlier. When these kind of additional programs come online for demand for these kind of products, it's just going to be a very, very positive for general RNG price. Though to the other person's question, might be expensive for consumers' energy bills. As we mentioned before, they were allowed in 2 states now to potentially charge up to $33 per M to consumers for renewable gas. Well, we bumped up against the end of our time. I want to thank my 2 friends, Dave and Roxby, for joining us. For people who have questions out there, you can always contact us at EcoEngineers, where the contact information will be made available to you in an email following this webinar. Always feel free to reach out or call Roxby, Dave, or myself. And thank you all for attending.